Thank you for joining us. Human rights for everyone is a cause of great concern, and with rising anti-Semitism, this of course includes Jewish people as well. The AJC is an organization founded in the year 1906 to protect the rights of Jewish people throughout the world. And the AJC fights anti-Semitism and bigotry and works for the security of Israel while enhancing human rights, democratic principles, and multicultural understanding. It also promotes the creative vitality of the Jewish people. And to tell us more about this, we have Amy Stoken, the director of the AJC Chicago Regional Office, who will share her views following these messages. With us now is Amy Stoken, Regional Director of AJC in this area, Chicago and the entire area. Nice to have you on the Shalom Show.
Thank you so much for having me.
Tell us a little bit about AJC in this part of the country.
AJC, our national mission is to enhance the safety and security of Israel and the Jewish people around the world. And we are carrying out that mission here in Chicago. Right now, the priorities we're focusing on is preventing Iran from acquiring a nuclear weapons capability. We are promoting Israel's stance in the world And we are also focusing on combating global anti-Semitism. And then here in Chicago, we have one added local priority, which is raising awareness of human rights abuses in Iran, and in particular, the Baha'i community. This is a local issue for us, as the North American headquarters for the Baha'i faith are right here in Wilmette.
I just interviewed two of the officials of that organization in this hotel a couple of days ago by coincidence. What I like about AJC is you're telling things the way they really are, expressing concerns realistically as they should be. One of the concerns I have is how media seems to misrepresent the truth, a form of anti-Semitism. They dwell on negatives criticizing Israel while ignoring worse events that happen elsewhere. What are your thoughts with regard to the double standard that Israel is subjected to with regard to media bias?
I do think it's unfortunate, and I think that part of what we're doing at AJC is to ensure that people are understanding Israel, not just the issues, but also the wonderful miracle that Israel is. We just celebrated Israel's Independence Day, and that was an opportunity for AJC to highlight all of the wonderful things that Israel's doing and really celebrate Israel as a miracle. And when you look at what is happening with this tiny country that absorbed Jews from all over the world, and now they're leaders in the high-tech industry, and they're at the forefront of several industries, it's an opportunity to really not just focus on the conflicts that Israel is dealing with, but also celebrate all the wonderful things Israel has to offer.
Very much needed to promote these achievements, spectacular achievements, frankly. AJC has branches all over the country. Tell us more about that.
I would say not just all over the country, actually all over the world. So AJC is a nonpartisan organization dedicated to advocacy. That is our main goal, is that we are advocating, whether it's with international leaders, whether it's with members of the Senate and the House here in the United States, or international diplomats located in Chicago. For example, in Chicago, we have a tremendous program focusing on working with the consul generals that are here stationed in Chicago. So all over the world, whether it's in Africa, Australia, Berlin, Brussels, we are day in and day out advocating for the issues that we believe in. Within the United States, we have 22 regional offices that are strategically placed, and we here in Chicago are one of the flagship offices. A large part of our work, as I mentioned, is working with the diplomats that are stationed here, but also we do a tremendous amount of interfaith work. We work with different faith-based leaders, leaders of different ethnic groups, and Chicago really is a hub for many communities. So we are able to take advantage of that here in Chicago. We do a tremendous amount of work with the Presbyterian community, the Catholic community. We work hand in hand with the Greek community here, the Polish community, and also the African American community. So we're always looking to build new bridges, and Chicago is one of the best places that we could be located to accomplish that mission.
Fascinating, a multicultural society, and the interrelationships are, of course, essential.
I would add one of the nice things about AJC is, while of course we're advocating for Israel and for the Jewish people, another part of our mission is to advance democracy and human rights worldwide. So we are able to be a Jewish partner with other communities to help achieve their goals as well.
Not to dwell on negatives, but I'd like your view on the UN resolutions, the Goldstone and other, which are later debunked perhaps. But tell us more about AJC's position with regard to the bias against Israel, and how when Israel finally retaliates, for example, in the 2006 war after endless barrages by terrorists from Lebanon, and Israel finally reluctantly retaliates, the world has the chutzpah to label Israel's justified retaliation as disproportionate, using the word disproportionate as a device to make it appear as if the victim was the oppressor. Israel was bombarded, civilian targets bombarded. When Israel retaliates, they call the reaction disproportionate. So this is a real prime example of the bias that Israel is subjected to. What are your thoughts on that?
My thoughts are it is incredibly unfortunate that we have this world body and somehow it's upside down. Here is Israel, a bastion of freedom in the Middle East, supports freedom of religion, freedom of speech, freedom of the press, and to quote one of my role models, Alan Dershowitz, he explains that if you were an alien looking down on the world and were looking at the UN, it would look like here was this peaceful planet with this one black mark, and that was Israel. And I think one of the things that AJC takes a lot of pride in is that we are able to have a variety of opinions, and that informs our advocacy work. But at the end of the day, we're sticking up for Israel. We're making sure people understand just how remarkable Israel is, and I think the UN completely has that backwards. It is okay to criticize Israel. It's not okay to hold Israel up to a higher standard than any other country around the globe. And I think that's unfortunately what happens in the media, as you mentioned, and especially happens in the UN. And one of the priorities, as I mentioned, that we work with the diplomats, that includes the ambassadors to the UN. So we actually have a program called the Diplomatic Marathon that kicks off before the General Assembly, and AJC staff and lay leaders will meet with as many ambassadors as possible before that starts to help work towards a better understanding, make sure that leaders who are voting in the UN understand the true nature of the conflict, the true nature of what Israel is facing, and hopefully improve their opinion of Israel. But I cannot stress enough that I agree wholeheartedly what you're saying, and it is incredibly unfortunate to see what is happening in the UN.
It's sad, the United Nations was regarded as this inspiring, lofty solution after World War II, but turned out to be, to many people, quite disappointing, and their biased resolutions disgraceful.
And I think people forget the original partition came out of the UN. I think the demographics have changed. The countries that make up the UN right now are not the same countries that made up the UN in 1947. Unfortunately, if partition went to a vote now, it probably wouldn't be in favor of an independent Jewish state. So given the current realities, what we need to do is step it up, increase our advocacy work with our colleagues across the globe, and help them better understand the situation as it is.
Interesting to point out that Israel, the one shining star of democracy in the Middle East, and all of these incredible achievements in a barren land, from drip irrigation, J&F projects from day one and prior actually, and all of the amazing things that Israel is doing in so many scientific areas. In mutual cooperation, the entire region could move towards peace and an improvement for all society in that area, all countries. So what you're doing in promoting peaceful ideas and cooperation, of course, is essential. What are your views with regard to the future?
I like to be an optimist. I think the future is bright. I think that we're the good guys. And if you look at the history of how hard Israel has worked to make peace, how hard Israel works to be a good neighbor, to be a good world citizen, if you see the humanitarian aid Israel is giving right now to Syria, all of the amazing things that Israel does, not just to maintain its own independence, but for democratic and freedom around the world, you have to hope that the good guys will prevail. And I look forward to a time when Israel can live in peace and security as a Jewish state. And I think that will only enable vibrant Jewish communities, not only within Israel, but around the world.
I certainly agree, and I want to thank you so much for being with us this morning. We have to do this again sometime soon.
Terrific. Thank you so much for having me.
Thank you. I'll be right back.